Hello and welcome to Your Daily Detroit, your daily all-local podcast, sharing what's new, what's next, and what matters in Metro Detroit. It is Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024. Today's feature conversation is with Dr. Kevin Peterson, who has added the title of author to his many credits, such as founder of Castalia in Midtown Detroit and many more interesting pursuits. His book, Cocktail Theory, A Sensory Approach to Transcendent Drinks, has been a hit among his industry and aficionados alike. We talk about it and a lot more in a conversation at our studio in Techtown. But first, I want to tell you about 5 stories to know around Metro Detroit.
5.
The issues for Stellantis keep piling on. Jeep has issued an urgent recall for more than 194,000 plug-in hybrid SUVs due to fire risk. The recall affects Wrangler and Grand Cherokee 4xe models, the Wrangler from 2020 through 2024, and the Cherokee 2022 through 2024. The company is asking owners to stop charging their vehicles and park them outdoors and away from structures until repairs can be made. The company reports more than a dozen fire incidents with 2 injuries. The fix is in the works, and Jeep will notify affected customers soon. For more information, owners can contact Jeep Customer Care or visit the Mopar site.
4.
It looks like Tigers fans may be watching the team on TV on another network next year. Diamond Sports Group, that owns Bally Sports Detroit, told a U.S. bankruptcy court that there's only one major league team they want to carry going forward, and that would be the Atlanta Braves. This means either a deal needs to be renegotiated with Diamond or the Tigers would need to find another broadcast home. Anaheim, Atlanta, Cincy, Kansas City, Miami, Milwaukee, St. Louis, and Tampa Bay are all in the same boat as the Motor City Baseball Cats on this one. As an FYI, recently hired Tigers broadcast voice Jason Benetti has a contract with the club, not Bally Sports. Crane's Detroit Business says the TV deal was worth about $50 million a year in revenue. Now, I know it might be impossible in this modern age of subscriptions for everything, but I miss when they were on TV sometimes on WDIV Channel 4 back in the day. Baseball needs all the eyes it can get, in my opinion, and since you can't stream it due to local blackouts, why not? Someone, let's find the money. Anyone got $50 million in a couch cushion?
3.
Royal Oak is moving forward in its search for a new city manager. The city has narrowed down the field to 3 finalists from 54 applicants, says the Oakland County Times. The candidates are Joseph Gacho, current city manager of Ferndale, Kalfani Stevens, deputy mayor of Pontiac, and Eric Tungate, who has been Oak Park city manager since 2012. Royal Oak is an economically growing suburb of Detroit with nearly 60,000 people. Household incomes are on the higher side of Metro Detroit at north of $90,000 a year, about 2.5 times that of households in the city of Detroit, and solidly above the regional average. Public interviews will take place on Saturday, October 12th, starting at 12:30 p.m. at Royal Oak City Hall. Residents are encouraged to attend.
2.
A pair of new food and drink options are coming to downtown Wyandotte. James Oliver Coffee, who has their flagship coffee and bagel shop in Detroit's Corktown and a coffee outpost in the Guardian building, is adding a location in the old Sanders on Biddle. An opening date has not been shared. And Northern Wind Brewing is coming to the Downriver suburb, opening in March of 2025. It'll be an 1,100 square foot brew house with a 92-seat tap room on 3rd Street. There will be a nearly 40-foot U-shaped bar, and they'll offer house-made craft beers plus a food menu with sandwiches, salads, and pizza. You can follow them on Instagram at Northern Wind Brewing.
1.
Now, anyone who's from the East Side might remember 2 sculptures from the former Eastland Mall that was in Harper Woods: The Lion and the Mouse by Marshall Fredericks and Hippo by William McVeigh. For 60 years, they were a part of growing up, including my childhood. After Eastland's closure in 2021, the sculptures were donated to the Detroit Historical Society. Now, thanks to work between the Society, North Point Development, and Ascension St. John, these nostalgic artworks are going back on public display. You can find the 4-ton Lion and the Mouse in the main courtyard of Ascension St. John, while Hippo greets patients near the Pediatric Emergency Department entrance. Now, Ascension St. John is on Maross, which is known as 7 Mile, over by Mac. I love seeing public art in different places, and keeping these on the east side just, well, feels right. After all, right by St. John Hospital is where the 31 Mac turned if you were going to take it to Eastland. Shout out to Food Court Chinese Food and How I Miss Thee and your MSG. All right, let's get to our feature conversation on the book, Cocktail Theory. Joining me here at the studio at Techtown is Dr. Kevin Peterson. He is the author of Cocktail Theory, a sensory approach to transcendent drinks. He is the purveyor of Castalia, a name you may have heard on the show, but one of my favorite places. It's favorite places in the city, as well as he's got Harmonic Spirits here going on. Dr. Kevin Peterson, I know you as like my friendly barkeep, and then you went ahead and became like an author, entrepreneur, something like that. Like, man, I walk away for like 6 months to deal. I come back and all of a sudden you're everywhere.
Yeah. You just can't turn your back. That's the lesson here. Yeah. Been doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes. You know, the book was an idea that I had in the back of my mind for a long time. It was really during the COVID shutdowns that I finally found time to at least get working on it in a serious way. And then once bars reopened and society reopened, you know, it was a little harder to carve out time to finish it off. So yeah, took me a couple of years, but glad to see it finally in physical form here.
Well, and what was your motivation for doing this book? Because I found it to be really useful to understand my cocktails a lot better, whether it's some of the theories to how you put together drinks, or one of the terms I really like, which is like the 9 families of drinks. The 9 families of drinks just makes me giggle, but there's just so much to it where it's like, oh, I feel like I actually learned something, and you bring a lot of unique perspective to this.
Yeah, I think one of my big motivations was that I didn't learn bartending from bartending, which I think most bartenders do. You get a job in some bar, somebody more senior person shows you how to make an old fashioned, shows you how to make a Manhattan. You do it a bunch, you pick up the skills. For me, I got my degree in engineering. I was working as an engineer. I was reading a bunch of cocktail books. So I really came into the bartending world from the book world more than the hands-on world. And my understanding of bars and bartending and drinks was part of my engineering background, part of my perfumery background, and then, further informed by actually running the bar. But yeah, having come to it from just such a unusual spot, I was like, okay, I think these insights could be useful for other people. And the way I thought about it differed from a lot of books that I saw out there. So I felt like it could be a unique addition to the book world as well.
Castalia et Sfumato, which is also another thing with the fragrances and such. What are some of the things that you learned? Because this is, you've had this place open for a little while now. So what are some of the things that you've learned with this, really cool? Everyone I show it to, it's this garden level bar in Midtown, trying these things out, putting so much work into it. Like I flipped through this book, and when you go through it and read it the first time, you're going to, want to stop sometimes, because there are charts. There is like scientific method applied to this. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no shortage of charts. One of the big things we do at the bar is think about how do the senses perceive a cocktail, which, sounds very intuitive, but I think a lot of people, a lot of bartenders, a lot of bars come to cocktails from more of a historical, traditional perspective of this is the way this has always been served. Let's try to recreate that. Or let's take this classic and tweak some of the elements a little bit. And the way that I think about drinks is, well, what are your taste buds perceiving? What are your olfactory receptors perceiving? How does the color of that drink, how does the weight of the glass influence the way you perceive that flavor? And then what weird tricks can we play now that we've sort of picked apart the sensory pieces? Can we tweak one, put them all back together and create a new experience? Some new perceptual elements that you've not experienced before. And yeah, I think we've had a lot of fun with it, and that's got to be the guiding, the North Star for us.
your bar has a really elevated and interesting approach to cocktails. And yes, you can order whatever you want there, like your standard, gin and tonic or old fashioned or whatever, but there's always a pairing of a scent. There's always something creative around it. How do you view kind of on-ramping people from, I just came from whatever bar I've known before into a world that is just, it's kind of like opening up the gates into like Wonderland as far as drinking goes when it comes to Castalia?
Yeah. I think we try to craft it as more of an experience than just a drink. And, try not to be too pretentious about it. If you're just here to, knock down a gin and tonic, that's fine. Like, you can do that. But we want to be a place where people want to explore, to ask questions. Oh, how did you pick this gin versus that gin? We use a lot of fairly esoteric ingredients, a lot of ingredients that are well known in the perfume world that aren't very well known in the cocktail world. Everything's food safe, everything's, above board, but just kind of pushing the bounds of what goes in a cocktail. What does a cocktail look like? What does a cocktail smell like? And we also try to staff in a way where there's time to get into the weeds and just say, yeah, what are your questions? Let's dive in and I think that's really the most rewarding part, is when a guest comes and says, all right, what's going on here? Explain this to me. To me, the explanation or the conversation can be as rewarding as the drink itself.
And the book has a lot of fun ways to approach these kind of things. And that fun carries through into the book. I mentioned the 9 families of cocktail. Another thing is the Mr. Potato Head theory when it comes to putting together drinks. I don't want to give away all the secrets, and I don't think I am.
You can give away a couple.
Okay, a couple. I appreciate that for our listeners. But why don't we talk about the Mr. Potato Head theory? Because it has really changed. Even how I make drinks at home, I think of you. Because it's like, this is how this comes together. And I feel like, and that's the other thing about it I like, is that it breaks it down in a much more approachable way, because making cocktails and doing craft cocktails to a lot of people feels intimidating. And when you think of Mr. Potato Head, you're having fun. You're laughing.
When I first decided to open a bar, I knew that there were thousands of cocktails out there. There's the Sex on the Beach. There's the Daiquiri. There's the Cosmopolitan. There's all these drinks. And I was like, oh man, I got to memorize all these drinks. So I started making flashcards, and I had a stack of 50, and then I had a stack of 100, and then I had a stack of 200. I was going through them, and some of them stuck. Some of them didn't. Okay, this one has peach this, and this one has whiskey, and this one you shake, and this one you stir. And I was approaching it purely through memorization, and it was not working very well. And then, this Mr. Potato Head idea is an idea that's been around for a while. It's in some other books. And the idea is that if you have a classic cocktail, say it's a bit of spirit, it's a bit of citrus, it's a bit of sweetener, you can swap out that spirit for a different spirit and the drink will still work. So if it's originally made with rum, you could make it with gin, you could make it with whiskey, you could make it with vodka, and it should still be balanced. And once I learned about that theory, it really simplified the memorization of the cocktails, because a daiquiri and a gimlet are essentially the same drink. It's just that one has rum, one has gin, everything else is the same. And so instead of having to memorize a few hundred, a few thousand different drinks, if you memorize a handful, then you can just swap in and out and everything becomes a variation on something else. And it's kind of this higher level idea where, in the music world, there are certain song structures. There's the 12-bar blues, and this song is a 12-bar blues, and that song, and that song. And even though they sound different to the casual listener, to someone trained in music, they say, okay, yeah, these songs are actually all the same structure. These songs are actually all the same structure. You don't have to memorize every one. You just memorize a couple structures. And in the food world, in the drink world, in the flavor world, what I originally saw was just a lot of anecdotal evidence. These two things go together. This makes this drink. This makes that drink. And this was the first time I saw a theory. Okay, now I can actually think about this in a more abstract way, but then put the pieces together to make a drink either with whatever I have on hand or to match whatever flavor profile I'm trying to create.
And you look at a number of ingredients too and how they interact together. Like in the book, you talk a bit about ice and how that works together and some of the myths that people have around it. And I just found all of these things interesting.
Yeah, so they say ice is to a bartender what fire is to a chef.
Mm.
So, most things start at room temp, but most things are served at, roughly 30 Fahrenheit. So how do you take that temperature out of the drink? Well, generally with ice. And yeah, a lot of home users get the ingredients right. So you buy the right whiskey, you buy the right orange or lemon or lime. You're putting things together in the right way, but then how that drink is shaken or how that drink is stirred has a big influence on the temperature of the drink, how much that ice melts, so how much extra water is in that drink, how many little air bubbles did you shake into that drink. And those have a huge influence on how the drink is enjoyed. So that's a part that a lot of home users don't get right. But with a couple rules of thumb, you can really dial that in. It's different to be a home user when you're just making one drink for yourself or maybe a couple for friends versus a bartender where you're making hundreds in a night. But yeah, there's some pretty simple tips and tricks that can really help you dial in the technique and create those optimized drinks. And that's what I try to lay out in the book.
How does your previous background impact what you're doing with this book? Because this book feels complete. It feels cared for. It isn't like an off the hip kind of like, well, here's some things I learned about cocktails. It's like, we're going to apply process to make your drinking life better. So how those two things come together, your previous life and your current life?
Yeah. So my previous life, I was an automotive engineer, and a lot of my job was to do a lot of very nitty-gritty tests, varying spark timing, varying fuel mass, varying all these minute parameters within an engine, figuring out how to optimize it, and then talking to managers. And the managers don't want to hear the details. They, give me 3 slides. What's the big picture here? So it was take all of this data, turn it into a story. And not just a story, but a story we can take action from. And that's really what I was trying to do with the book, is to say, okay, you probably don't want to hear about every little sip that I took and every variation. We're going to just kind of smooth some of that out and gloss over it at a high level. But what are the actionable ideas that come out of this? And, and it was a little bit tough for me to say, well, what level of minutia should be included? At what point am I just getting so far in the weeds that it's only interesting to myself and no one else? Luckily, I had a few friends read the book and they were like, yep, this chapter's little much. Let's cut back in this area here. So yeah, I was able to get some good feedback from, the Muggle population and help me tune some things down. So yeah.
Us Muggles out there.
Indeed.
Let's talk a little bit about what you learned doing this book. Maybe what you learned that you thought different when you started.
One of the things that I found really staggering was the difference between an old-fashioned and a Negroni. And prior to doing the book, prior to doing the research, I thought of them both as spirit-forward, robust drinks, somewhat replaceable. I mean, different aromatics. They appeal to, slightly different palates, but they're both these kind of boozy bartender drinks, old standards that I felt like, okay, you should be able to go into any bar and the bartender should just be able to nail them. Very safe bet. And what I found, so one of the series of tests I did was to say, okay, well, if the recipe calls for a half ounce, let me use 3/4, an ounce and a quarter, and an ounce and a half, and vary all these ratios of the ingredients and see where does the drink just fall apart. And what I found was that the Negroni, you can vary all those ratios in a huge way, and the drink is still quite drinkable, delicious even. Whereas the old fashioned, there's just like this knife edge, narrow little spot that you have to hit. You've got to get everything exactly right, or the drink falls apart, which as soon as I got the results, I was like, oh, of course that tracks. How many old fashions have I had out on the town that were terrible?
You know what? This is a common experience. And I actually use old fashions as a way to tell if a bar has their stuff together. And I didn't know until I read the book about that simple fact.
Sure.
Like a bad old fashioned, I know that the rest of the drinks, I'm not going to take a chance on. I'm going to go to default of like, if I have another drink there, I'm going to go to a Jack and Coke, or I'm going to go to a gin and tonic or a beer where like there's no like variables to it. Like once you get past 2 ingredients, the variables start to get higher. And if you can't nail an old fashioned, I'm like, I don't trust you for more.
Yeah, very reasonable. It's when I'm going out, if there's a bartender, I'm like, oh, maybe this person could work at Castelli at some point. Yeah, that's one of the drinks I use as a test to see, can you nail, essentially the most iconic classic of all time, the old fashioned. If you haven't put the time in to get that down, yeah, we don't need to talk anymore.
You did a first run. I understand you've already sold out of your first run.
I did. Very pleasantly surprised to do that. Yeah, I'm self-publishing. I bought 500 copies initially. So, yeah, one day a few months ago, the FedEx truck just pulled up and unloaded 40 boxes of books, and I carted them inside. And I kind of thought I might be staring at those boxes of books forever,
making forts for your kid or whatever, like, oh, hey, the book didn't sell, but you've got
a coffee table. Now it's a fort. Now it's a footrest. Yeah. Multi-purpose book boxes, but people bought them. A lot of friends and family bought them, but then orders started coming in from across the country. People from Germany and UK and Australia started emailing me, hey, how can I get this book? Across the ocean. I'm like, oh, I didn't think of that, but I will think about it now.
How has been the adventure and the journey of self-publishing? It seems like it's gone all right for you. What are some things that maybe even sharing with somebody else who might self-publish? Because here's the thing. I look at this book. I look at the quality of this. Like, I think there are some stigmas around self-publishing that I think are not kind of fair.
I think 5 or 10 years ago, they probably were fair. And I think that whole process is getting a lot smoother. I was very lucky to have a friend who had done some self-publishing and said, here's an editor you should maybe talk to, and here's a designer you should maybe talk to. And, so I was lucky enough to get some help in that department. But yeah, I think the pros and cons are with a traditional publishing house, you're mostly providing the words, and then the publishing team says, how do we turn this into a product we can make money on? Which, of course, is the ultimate goal of writing a book, typically. And at that point, a lot of those decisions may not be in the author's hands anymore. What's the cover going to look like? Should the chapters get shifted around? You might get asked to write another chapter or delete one that you liked. The advantage of self-publishing was I got to make every choice. It's daunting, right? It's good and bad. What color is the cover going to be? What font size is the print going to be? Some of these questions, like, I don't know what weight of paper I want.
But it seems like you surrounded yourself with people and were recommended people that it was still a team. It was just a team that was on your team.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had to find my team, but it was all people that I handpicked, and they did a great job, and the product came out great. And yeah, now I'm very happy I did it this way. Out of the gate, I was like, oh man, I got to make every decision myself. But the further I got into the process, I was like, yeah, actually, this is the way I want to do it. So
when you take that creative freedom, in my mind, you also take on a high creative responsibility of like following through.
With great freedom comes great responsibility.
Yeah. Okay. Before we go, I want to talk about one more thing. There's this bottle here called Harmonic Spirits, because it seems like you can't have enough things to do in your day. This looks amazing. I haven't tried it yet. So what's the idea behind this kind of like ready to go spirit situation?
Yeah. So in a sense, these are actually both COVID era projects. So I started doing a lot of cocktails to go when I couldn't have customers into the bar. And I had all these recipes for different drinks. And then when bars reopened, most of those just got filed away somewhere and went away.
Some of those were delivered to my house, which I was very excited about. It helped me get through, sir.
Yes, indeed. But I started hanging out with Lance Havelka, owner of East Bank Spirits, and gave him these recipes and he said, okay, well, let me take a crack at putting these in a bottle for you. So basically with his licensing, like as a bar owner, I cannot sell bottles directly to the public. But Lance, as a distiller, they're produced under his license. He can sell them to liquor stores, to other bars. And, what I saw, and again, this kind of cuts back to our previous conversation. You go out, you get a bad old fashioned. Very disappointing. Well, what if you had a product that already had dialed in ratios, dialed in everything? Basically, all you had to do was pour, stir, balanced, delicious old fashions ready to go. So rather than aiming at more of a craft cocktail bar where probably the bartender wants to take all those steps and ensure them themselves, this is aimed more at high volume wedding venues, concert venues, places where
time is not on your side. Like I think about
3,000 people need
right. Like I went to like the last time I went to one of those kind of shows, I think I went to John Oliver. He came into town and I was wanting drinks and I like a nice drink, but there's no way you're going to order that kind of thing when there's a line of people. You don't want to be that guy. And even your end product, no shame against anywhere you're at, but you're at a high pressure venue. Like you have to be, when you are going out and eating and drinking, in my mind, you need to be cognizant of the kind of place that you're at.
Yeah.
And so I feel like this helps get that done.
Totally. And so, yeah, the idea is for places that either have that time pressure, don't want to do the prep, or just want to provide a more consistent product and experience to their guests, that's the way to do it.
So where can people find all the things?
Yeah. So the book is at my bar, Castalia. The book is also on my website, sfumatofragrances.com, SFUMATO fragrances.com. The spirits are at the Fillmore. They're at the Detroit Symphony. They're at Total Wine. They are at, hopefully soon to be at a bunch of other places, but that is most of the list for the moment.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Kevin Peterson. His book, Cocktail Theory, A Sensory Approach to Transcendent Drinks. Well, thank you so much for listening to Your Daily Detroit. I hope you enjoy that we've added some stories at the beginning of the podcast. I've done a couple of surveys. I heard from people. That's something people would like, so that every episode they get a little bit of Detroit news and a topic that they are interested in. Give me feedback on that, this episode, or anything else, dailydetroit@gmail.com. And thank you to our members on Patreon, patreon.com/dailydetroit, who kind of help advance that idea. Until tomorrow, remember that you are somebody, and I'll see you around Detroit.